5 pro-life activists are charged with violating the Freedom to Access Clinic Entrances law and face up to 11 years in prison. I will have one of the lead attorneys on the program to discuss this and what this means for them and for the pro-life movement. Also, we're going to be talking about late-term abortions. Are they a thing? Well, according to the pro-abortion people, they aren't. They don't happen. Nobody promotes them. Well, I'll debunk that here on the program with evidence and video. So stay tuned. You're listening to The Mark Harrington Show. Activist Radio, The Mark Harrington Show is brought to you by Created Equal, and you can donate to our work by going to createdequal.org, and you can pick up the program on all the popular podcasting platforms. Follow me on social media as well, Instagram, YouTube, and all the rest. We're here in Ohio fighting this constitutional amendment that's going to be on the ballot in November. We're going to talk about that later in the program. But before we do, we got some breaking news coming out of Washington, D.C. And I know if you're a pro-life activist like myself, you've been following this closely. And I've been talking about it for years with good friends of mine who are involved in the Operation Rescue movement, or have been, the Red Rose Rescue movement, my good friend Dr. Monica Miller, and others I've had on the program to talk about it. Well, today we're going to talk about this case in Washington, D.C., against 5 individuals, pro-life activists that were involved in a rescue, if you will, at the Santangelo abortion mill in Washington, D.C., the Washington Surgery Clinic back in October of 2020. And they were charged, or at least in March of 2022, if I'm correct here. And a verdict was handed down last week against the 5, found guilty of violating the Freedom to Access Clinic Entrances law. And so we want to talk about that with Martin Cannon, who is the senior trial counsel for the Thomas More Society, who represents Lauren Handy, one of those plaintiffs. Martin, thanks for being on the show. We appreciate everything the Thomas More Society does. They keep people like me out of trouble. I appreciate that very much, you guys, and the work you. I love Tom Brecka, Peter Breen, Andy Bath. They're all good friends of mine and do just amazing work. And so listen, I want to bring our people up to speed as to what's happening here. There's been a lot of discussion in the pro-life movement about this trial. And if you would, bring us up to speed. We've got 5 individuals: Lauren Handy, Will Goodman, John Hinshaw, Heather Idoni, I think it's pronounced, and then Rosemary Geraghty, goes by Herb, have all been apparently convicted of FACE. So first of all, what is the Freedom to Access Clinic Entrances law, or FACE? What is it?
What it is a law that was passed in the early 90s that basically says it's illegal to use force, threat, or obstruction to block somebody's access to a clinic because that person is providing or seeking reproductive health services. And reproductive health services, of course, revolve around abortion.
Right. And this was
brought up access to a clinic because they're doing something other than legal abortions, you're not violating FACE. And that's something we might talk about in a little more detail here, because that was essentially our defense.
Yeah, and the law was passed and signed into law during the Clinton administration after the Operation Rescue movement, because of the blockades. And really up to date, it hasn't really come into play until recently. And that's something we need to talk about.
Yeah, there's been a spike in FACE prosecutions. I've handled several of them, but they're separated by years, and then suddenly we have this one. We have Mark Houck. We've got one in Tennessee. We have one in Michigan. It was as though the DOJ could see that Roe was on borrowed time, and they were just starting brush fires everywhere they could.
Right. So let's talk about this specific case. My listeners, my viewers will be familiar with that abortion center there in Washington, D.C., the Washington, D.C. Surgery Center, run by late-term abortionist Cesare Santangelo. My listeners and viewers are familiar with that because we talked about the DC-5, the late-term children, along with others that were retrieved from the sidewalk from a medical waste provider over about a year and a half ago. That obviously is a story kind of that runs parallel in some ways to this. But before that is when the alleged violation of FACE occurred. And that was in, if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, Martin, that was March of 2020, or I'm sorry, October of 2020. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what's gone on now? They've had the tell us about the case starting a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
Get us up to speed.
Well, first of all, it's not just our 5. There are 10 defendants, and the judge split the case in 2. So the other 10 or the other 5 will be tried very shortly here, and it's really only one case. So in a way, the case isn't really over yet. But our 5 were tried. It took us a week to get a jury, and that's actually pretty important. This is Washington, D.C. The judge wisely pulled in over 100 people for a jury pool, and we took a week going through it. Easily 75% of the jury pool were people who not only donate to Planned Parenthood regularly, but also march in the women's marches. Mm-hmm. And out of the 110 or 120 people, only 2 or 3 made vague and kind of non-committal notions and comments about being pro-life. So that by the time we got a jury selected, we had 3 or 4 people who are regular donors to Planned Parenthood and march in the marches. And the other members of the jury are people for whom access to reproductive health care is a very important issue. Mm-hmm. So you could see the problem in Washington, D.C. And having said that, I do think the jury listened to us pretty carefully, especially during closing. And they did take a little longer to come up with their convictions than they might have. So I do think they were thinking about it. But nonetheless, you can see what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think we all understand. I've talked about this, and most of America understands. You can't get a fair trial in Washington, D.C. Look at Donald Trump right now. I mean, it's just not likely that man's going to walk away without a conviction. But, and I think we all understand the corruption and the Department of Justice and all of that, and we'll get into that afterwards. But talk about the trial, how'd it go, the verdict, what it means for those who are now sitting in prison.
It's very important. Understand that the violation of FACE for most of our people would be a misdemeanor. And there's a question about physical injury can kind of kick it up and all that. And there's some uncertainty on that point as to sentencing. But the big takeaway here is this is likely to be a misdemeanor. But the federal government, in seeing that, charges them also with a conspiracy under a little used conspiracy statute that makes a conspiracy to commit a misdemeanor a felony. So we've got people who could be convicted of a 6-month violation, the underlying violation, but do 10 years in prison for conspiring to do it, which is just imbalanced. It's unfair. It's improper.
Yeah, and the thing is, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but it's what they call conspiracy against rights. Am I correct?
That's
and
correct.
What right is being conspired against?
Well, that in theory is the federal right, the federal constitutional right to an abortion. And of course, our argument is that after Dobbs, there is no longer such a right. And that'll be one of the items on appeal that I do think the Supreme Court will take very seriously.
Well, certainly there is no federal right to abort. We believe that all along. But as far as the Supreme Court goes, they struck down Roe versus Wade, and Dobbs is the precedent now. So that's the thing here, right? So what is the penalty for a first timer if they violate FACE and it's a nonviolent violation?
6 months.
6 months.
6 months.
So 6 months, and the conspiracy against rights, you say, is up to 10. Is that the?
Yes.
Okay.
And so it's just very disproportionate. Most federal conspiracy charges are brought under a different statute that specifically provides that the penalty for the conspiracy can be no worse than the penalty for the underlying crime.
Makes sense.
In this case, there's no such protection because federal constitutional rights are sort of a sacred cow, and maybe they should be. But the problem is there isn't one anymore. And that's an important change since Dobbs.
And let's just talk about FACE generally. It was I think signed into law in 1993. Maybe I'm wrong there by
Maybe
a year
94, but early
94.
90s.
Unconstitutional, right?
Well,
The
there's a
law
very
itself.
good argument. There's a very good argument that it's actually content based and other constitutional arguments. Of course, they've been tried many, many times, and it's always survived. This might be different because it's post Dobbs. It's never been challenged post Dobbs, and our case has been. We've made a good record on it. It's teed up. It's ready for that challenge, and we're probably farther in the pipeline than any other case.
So these five plaintiffs were found guilty of violating FACE and the conspiracy against rights. Tell us what happened when the judgment was handed down, decision.
Well, that was also a bit of a surprise. You know, the expectation is typically that when you get convicted of a crime, you've been out on pretrial release. You stay out on pretrial release until your sentencing, which could be a couple months down the road. In this case, the judge took the defendants immediately into custody. And the reason she did is because she feels like she did it under a state or a federal law that says when you convict somebody of a crime of violence, you take them into custody right away. You don't wait for sentencing. She viewed the FACE Act or violation of it as a crime of violence, even though you can violate FACE without committing violence. So we feel like she put it in the wrong category. And we just yesterday filed an emergency appeal with the DC Circuit Court of Appeals to have her view of that reviewed.
Right. So explain what your client did.
Well,
right.
It starts actually with the Santangelo video that your people are probably familiar with. 10 years before the events, she's a kid in college. She's, liberal as they come. She's a very left-leaning person in practically every way. But she sees this video and it absolutely struck her to the core. She skipped her final exams. She quit school. She sold her book collection. She packed her bag and she took a 4-day train trip. Well, first of all, she took a 4-hour train ride to Santangelo's clinic where Lila Rose was having a press conference, attended the press conference. Then she took a 4-day bus trip, I think it was, to California to work for another pro-life organization, researching specifically the incidence of born-alive abortions. That was such an important thing to her that she came back across the country on 2 occasions to go just to his clinic. And that became a big part of our defense, because if Santangelo is delivering babies alive and killing them or letting them die, this is not reproductive health care under FACE. And those babies are entitled to all the same protections that you and I'd be entitled to if somebody was killing us. Lauren can go in the clinic. She can block things. She can make a ruckus. She can refuse to leave. She's protecting human children whose killing is not protected by FACE.
Right. And you attempted, at least from what I've read, to introduce information regarding this, the images and the video. Mr. Producer, if you would, go ahead and play this. This is really rough stuff, friends. I mean, this is grotesque, terrible. Beyond belief that someone can do this. Yeah. But we have the footage, and they would. The judge refused to allow this into court. Is that correct?
Right. She looked at the video, and she felt like in it, Santangelo was not admitting that these live birth abortions were happening or could happen in his clinic. I think she's just reading it wrong. She felt like the prejudicial impact of these videos was exceeded their probative value and all that. That's a kind of a weighing thing that we do about evidence. But interestingly enough, how could they have prejudicial effect if not for the very important point that we're trying to bring out here?
Exactly.
If we were showing, Petri dishes or, lasagna pans full of appendixes that people had removed, nobody would say that has a prejudicial impact. It's because these are babies.
Right. And so they didn't allow the defense that she was, she was out to defend these preborn children. And, we've talked
Let me
about this
correct you
case.
on that just one bit. The
Sure thing.
judge allowed her to testify that she had seen a video, which convinced her that Santangelo is letting babies be born alive and killing them or letting them die. And she talked about how much it impacted her. But without actually showing the video, that just sounds like the ravings of an activist who's conspiratorial or whatever. The video would have given Lauren credibility on that point, and we weren't allowed to show it.
Well, and the video also lends to the charges of people that, like myself, who said that Santangelo's violating federal law, Partial Birth Abortion Act, and the Unborn Victims of Violence Act. Right? I mean, that obviously isn't part of this case, but those charges have never been even barely even looked at by the Washington, D.C. establishment, if you will. So, all right. So Lauren and the others are currently in prison awaiting sentencing. When is that happening?
It isn't scheduled yet. We've got of course, right now we're working on the reversing the immediate incarceration thing. That's going to take some time. We also have what's called a Rule 29 motion that we have to make. It's a motion to dismiss that really happens at the close of the state's case, but we put it off until the end of the trial so we could have the benefit of the transcript to make it. That's mostly a formality. But the sentencing won't be set likely until after that hearing. So
friends, first of all, we need to be praying for these individuals who are currently incarcerated because of their defense of the unborn. You may not agree with rescue. You may agree with rescue. You may think that civil disobedience is not something that pro-life activists should be participating in. Really, to me, that's not even of an issue here. We have fellow brothers and sisters who are being persecuted, taken to prison, possibly because of their beliefs that the preborn deserve rights, and are willing to put their bodies in the way to possibly defend them and do things that are completely, from my perspective, legitimate if we believe that what we believe, and that is that the unborn are human and deserve the same protections that born children do. So, Martin, if you would, let me kind of put a fine point on this and get your kind of perspective on what you think is really going on here. Is the Biden administration trying to send a signal to pro-lifers, or is this just a one-off?
I think it's trying to send signals in two directions. One, to the pro-lifers, saying, we're watching. We're not going to overlook any of this stuff. You commit a small crime, we're going to charge you with a big one. But I think they're also sending a signal to their base that says we're on this. When Dobbs came down and the left was going crazy, I think the Biden administration wanted to get on the wagon, and that's kind of what we're looking at here. So, and then on the other end of it, Lauren's concerns about live birth abortions were very much corroborated by these babies that came off the truck a year or so after the event. And when we and a lot of other people, 25 congressmen and senators, demanded that this be investigated, DC Mayor Muriel Bowser wrote a letter back to them saying, without any autopsy having been done, no significant evaluation of these babies at all, she said, and her police person said, these babies were killed legally. The real crime here is how Lauren Handy came into possession of the babies. Forget about the murder over here. Look at the jaywalker over here. They are so in the tank for this sacred cow that is abortion that truth doesn't even matter.
Yeah. And so the second trial of there 4 more that are going before the same judge? When is that taking place?
It's very soon. I forget the exact date, but it's within the next few weeks.
Okay. So, friends, we want you to be praying for this case. We want you to be praying for the Thomas More Society and their attorneys, including Martin, as they try to defend the folks here that are involved in this. This should concern all of us as pro-life activists. That it's open season. The Biden administration will stop at nothing to stop us, even if it comes to using laws like the FACE Act to bring us down. So we're seeing this across the board, this type of corruption, and we need to be willing to stand against it. Martin, if you would give us some parting words as you're representing Lauren, and for that matter, many of these, and likewise, how would you exhort our fellow pro-life activists across the country as they're looking at this?
Well, I would say, first of all, pray for our clients. They need it. They're a lovely, lovely bunch of people. I've thoroughly enjoyed, I feel it's an honor to represent them. The other thing is join them. They are falling on their swords. One of them likes to say abortion is murder. Let's act like it. And they are falling on their swords on this issue. Already we've seen pro-abortion people flipped over to pro-life stuff because of these people and this case. And it's going to keep happening, but it will happen all the more if more people kind of join them on the sidewalks or join them in the clinics. It is so worthwhile. We are winning this issue. We are winning this thing, but it has been entirely a product of God's grace and the actions of activists, not people sitting in their church basements writing letters to the editor, but getting out there and making noise when the more politic people would say you should be quiet. So we need the activists. We love the activists. We'll take them with all their warts. They're wonderful people, and God bless them.
Well, you're speaking our language here. Created equal. Again, my guest today, Martin Cannon, Senior Trial Counsel for the Thomas More Society. Martin, thanks for taking the time. And we will be in prayer for you and all of those who are representing our friends there in Washington with this egregious FACE Act trial. Appreciate your work.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So, friends, I hope that the last segment with Martin Cannon brought you up to speed as to what's happening with this case against the 5 activists in Washington on the Freedom to Access Clinic Entrances Law. And what I want to do is I want to segue to what's happening here in the state of Ohio, because this whole concept or idea, the notion that there's late-term abortion happening in America, is something that the pro-abortion activists will not admit. They continually say that it's not a thing. It doesn't happen. We're not promoting it. Democrats don't want to support it. Pro-abortion activists don't support it, and it's just not happening. Well, nothing can be further from the truth. This recently came up in the GOP debates several weeks ago when Ron DeSantis brought up the story of an abortion survivor, a victim who survived an abortion. And right there before your eyes, you can see it. And he mentioned it. And that started a firestorm of controversy across the country talking about late-term abortion. And of course, the other side is circling the wagons on this and saying that it doesn't happen. Now, I just want to give you a little bit of information here, and that is this. Late-term abortion really is not defined specifically by the medical community, although there is a general consensus that it takes place around the second trimester when an unborn child can feel pain. And so this can be anywhere from 15 weeks and up. Right now in the state of Ohio, we have an abortion ban at 21 and a half weeks. And that's generally based on the notion of viability. So somewhere in this area is what we consider a late-term abortion. They happen. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 113 late-term abortions occurred in the state of Ohio in 2020. After 21 weeks, there were 1,218 abortions were committed after 16 weeks in the state of Ohio. Nationally speaking, according to the Centers for Disease Control, about 10,000 late-term abortions occur in the United States. So it is a thing. And if you don't believe me, let's just look at the ones who perform them. The Alan Guttmacher Institute basically verifies that this is a thing. According to Alan Guttmacher himself, who is the father of Planned Parenthood, he said that abortions would be unlikely to prolong, much less life or save life. He said today it's possible for almost any patient to be brought through a pregnancy alive. unless they suffer from fetal illness such as cancer or leukemia. So what he's saying there is that these so-called late-term abortions are occurring on healthy babies and healthy mothers. This is the case. I mean, we look at Martin Haskell, who performs late-term abortions here in the state of Ohio, and he goes, I'll be quite frank, most of my abortions are elective in that range of 20 to 24 weeks. In my particular case, probably 20% are for genetic reasons. Only 2 out of 10 are for reasons of genetics. 80% are purely elective. So we're talking about Martin Haskell. We're talking about Alan Guttmacher, verifying that late-term abortions do happen. And of course, I just showed you video of Cesare Santangelo's victims, the 5 that were retrieved from a sidewalk in front of an abortion center in Washington, D.C. We don't need any more evidence than that. It may not be happening as often as second and first trimester abortions, but if you consider that, in the state of Ohio, 113 were killed this way in 2020 and 1,218 after 16 weeks of pregnancy, and that in the country, 10,000 occur every year, that's a lot, especially looking at these children. Most of them can live outside the womb. And so, friends, the reason I'm bringing this up is not only is there a full-scale effort to debunk the notion that there are late-term abortions all across the country coming from the Democrat Party in regards to the 2024 presidential election, but we're facing this in Ohio, and that is we have a constitutional amendment that's going to be on the ballot on November 7th, and it will expand abortion up to the very moment of birth. If you don't believe me, let's listen to the ones that are promoting the amendment. And what I want to do is I'm going to play this clip. This is from my good friend and colleague, Seth Dreher, who comments on the statements made by those who are supporting the amendment and a question that was asked from a reporter regarding the idea that abortions would be enshrined in the Ohio Constitution up to the very moment of birth. Go ahead and play this clip. Again, Seth Dreher commenting from this press conference that was held regarding the abortion amendment here in Ohio. Go ahead and play the clip.
The radical pro-abortion amendment in Ohio would make it legal to kill babies through all 9 months of pregnancy. Don't believe me? Listen to their leaders.
What is great about this issue is that this would allow...
That's a reporter right there asking the question. That there's abortions up to the very moment of birth.
We trust Ohioans to be able to make their decision about their reproductive health care.
Her response? Not, that's wrong, but we trust people to decide for themselves. Now that's enough right there, but the reporter, taking that as a non-answer, repeated his question. And then the leader of Pro-Choice Ohio stood up.
All due respect, that's BS. There are very few instances where a patient requires an abortion later in pregnancy. And when they do, that is a deeply personal decision with very complex factors that have to be taken into account. Ones that no politician or judge should be involved in.
All due respect, there's our answer. First, she says that late-term abortions are rare, but that means they do happen. And further, she says that when they happen, they're personal, so personal that people should decide without any judge or politician involvement. That means their amendment is aimed toward giving every born person the right to kill preborn people, that is babies, at any point in pregnancy, early or late. There's our answer. This is barbaric. This is radical. Protect children. Vote no.
There you go. Couldn't have said it better. My colleague Seth Dreher responding to the comments of the pro-abortion people regarding the notion, the understanding that the abortion amendment here in Ohio will legalize abortion up to the very moment of birth and remove all limitations on abortion up until birth. Kelly Copeland, the pro-abortion advocate, said that these abortions occur because it's a deeply personal issue. Deeply personal. Let's think about that. Let's extrapolate that and say, what about born children? Do you think it's deeply personal for a woman to kill their born child? What's personal about that? Nothing. It's barbaric, period. She says complex. What is so complex about a child that can live outside the womb who, by killing it, does nothing to save the life or health of the mother? Because the baby can live outside the womb. You don't need to take the life of the unborn child. In fact, C. Everett Koop, who was a former Surgeon General around 1980, said this about late-term abortions in the cases of affecting or dealing with the issues of the health of the mother. He said, quote, "I have never known of one instance where the child had to be aborted to save the mother's life or health." Not a single one. And it makes sense. If the child's viable, perform a cesarean section, deliver the child alive. There's no reason to kill the baby other than you want a dead baby. And that's really at the heart of this. So late-term abortions are a thing. In the state of Ohio, we are looking at this constitutional amendment, which will enshrine abortion up to the moment of birth, remove all limitations on abortion. Why do I say that? If you look at the language itself, and Mr. Producer, if you would, scroll down, and we have this amendment on our website at createdequal.org/abortion amendment. And if you hover over the words health, you will see what that means. So basically, the constitutional amendment basically says that abortion can be restricted or banned in the cases of viability. It talks about what viability means, but then says that between the physician, which is the abortionist, and the mother, they can decide to have an abortion in the cases of if it threatens the health of the mother. And we know historically and legally speaking that that issue of health of the mother has been interpreted by courts and lawyers and attorneys and jurists to include almost anything: emotional, familial, psychological, spiritual health. So basically, for any reason or no reason, even if the child's viable, between the abortionist and the mother, if they believe that the child threatens the health of the mother, they can kill the baby after viability. And then again, viability has been redefined over the years. In fact, Warren Hearn himself recently said in an article that appeared in the Atlantic magazine that health is, or that viability is really up to the abortionist or the doctor, he says, and the woman to decide. So in other words, if the woman doesn't want the baby, then the baby's not viable. It has nothing to do with the science, has nothing to do with whether the baby can live outside the womb. And so that is why we make the case that if this amendment is passed, if this constitutional amendment is passed and abortion is enshrined in the Ohio Constitution, it will take away all limitations and restrictions on abortion all the way to the very moment of birth, legalizing painful, violent, late-term abortions. We are telling the truth. And so people can understand that. And to find out more, you can go to our website at createdequal.org/abortion amendment. And friends, we need your help. Here's your call to action. I keep beating the drum here. We need people to come to Ohio and be involved in our door-to-door campaign. We are gearing up right now. And within a week, we're going to be hitting the ground running with groups all across the country, or all across the state, in 5 separate regions. And we are hoping to knock on hundreds of thousands of doors between now and November. And we need people to come and volunteer to do that. And you can sign up by going to createdequal.org/Ohio. And you can sign up on our website there, and we will get in touch with you and put you in the game. So thanks for tuning in today on the Mark Harrington Show. We'll see you next time. God bless you. God bless America. And remember, America, to bless God.
You've been listening to Mark Harrington, your radio activist. For more information on how to make a difference for the cause of life, liberty, and justice, go to createdequal.org. To follow Mark, go to markharringtonshow.com. Be sure to tune in next time for your marching orders in the culture war.